Picture a series of soldiers scattered across time. A Russian infantryman huddles in the snows of Manchuria in 1905. A Red Army private defends a barricade in the rubble of Stalingrad in 1942. A Vietnamese guerrilla navigates a jungle trail in the 1960s. An Afghan mujahid takes aim from a mountain pass in the 1980s. A modern-day militiaman stands guard at a checkpoint. These warriors are separated by more than 130 years of history, by dozens of nations, empires, and ideologies. What single, tangible thing connects them all? The answer is the rifle in their hands, the Mosin-Nagant. To understand this rifle's incredible longevity, we must go back to its birth in the late 19th century, a time of frantic technological revolution. A new arms race was sweeping across the world's great powers. Smokeless powder had rendered old black powder firearms obsolete overnight, and every major army was rushing to equip its soldiers with a new generation of small-caliber, magazine-fed bolt-action rifles. France had its Lebel, Germany was perfecting its Mauser, and Britain had its Lee Metford. The Russian Empire, still armed with the single-shot Berdan rifle, was falling dangerously behind. A modern, multi-shot rifle was no longer a luxury, it was a matter of national survival. In 1883, a special commission was formed to find this new weapon, sparking a dramatic competition. On one side was Captain Sergei Ivanovich Mosin of the Imperial Russian Army. His design was rugged, simple, and built with the harsh realities of the Russian soldier in mind. On the other was a titan of the European arms industry, the famous Belgian designer Léon Nagant, who presented a more sophisticated and finely machined rifle. The two designs were put through a series of brutal trials. They were baked in dust, exposed to the elements, and fired thousands of times. The results were stark. Nagant's elegant rifle suffered 557 stoppages. Mosin's simpler, cruder design had only 217. In the brutal calculus of war, reliability is king. The commission made its choice. While some minor features from Nagant's design were incorporated, the core of the weapon, the robust bolt and receiver, was Mosin's. In 1891, the Russian army officially adopted the three-line rifle, Model 1891. The name three-line referred to its caliber. A linea was an old Russian unit of measurement equal to 1/10 of an inch, making 3 lines the equivalent of .30 caliber, or 7.62 millimeters. The legend had been born.
Part 2. From Infantrymen to Cossack. The initial adoption of the Model 1891 was not a one-size-fits-all affair. Recognizing the different needs of its vast and varied army, the Russian Empire produced 3 primary versions of the rifle, 3 distinct sisters born from the same design. The first and most common was the infantry rifle. It was a long, heavy, formidable weapon with a 31.6-inch barrel designed for massed volley fire by foot soldiers in the classic 19th century style. Its length, especially with its iconic spike bayonet attached, made it nearly as tall as the average soldier who carried it. Next was the dragoon rifle. Intended for Russia's mounted infantry, or dragoons, it was slightly shorter and lighter than its infantry counterpart, with a 28.6-inch barrel. This made it more manageable on horseback and for artillery crews, who also received this version. Finally, there was the Cossack rifle, a near-identical copy of the dragoon model with one key difference. It was not designed to be fitted with a bayonet, as the Cossacks were expected to fight with their traditional shashka sabers in close quarters. These 3 versions armed the entirety of the Tsar's army, sharing the same core action and powerful 7.62 by 54R cartridge. As military tactics evolved, the need for an even more compact weapon became clear. In 1907, the arsenal produced the Model 1907 carbine. With its barrel chopped down to just 20 inches, this carbine was a short, handy weapon issued to machine gun crews, sappers, and other second-echelon troops who needed a firearm for self-defense but were encumbered by a long rifle. It was the first truly compact Mosin, setting a precedent for future developments. The most significant and famous evolution of the rifle, however, came after the brutal lessons of World War I and the Russian Civil War. By 1930, the newly formed Soviet Union decided to standardize production. They took the handier dragoon-length rifle as their template, made a series of crucial but subtle improvements, and created the rifle that would become the definitive Mosin-Nagant, the Model 1891-30. The old hexagonal receiver was replaced with a simpler round receiver. The archaic hooded front sight was replaced with a simpler post and globe design, and the sights were recalibrated in meters instead of the old-fashioned Arshins. This was the rifle that would be produced in the tens of millions. It was the M91-30 that would become the primary long arm of the Red Army, the very tool with which it would face its greatest test in the Second World War.
Part 3. In the Fires of World Wars. The Mosin-Nagant received its baptism by fire not in the fields of Europe, but in the hills of Manchuria during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. Here it proved itself to be exactly what its designers intended: a tough, powerful, and fundamentally reliable military rifle. Its powerful 7.62 by 54R cartridge outranged the Japanese Arisaka rifle, and its long needle-like bayonet made it a fearsome polearm in a desperate charge. A decade later, it was plunged into the inferno of the First World War. From the Tannenberg campaign to the Brusilov offensive, millions of Mosin-Nagants were carried by the soldiers of the Imperial Russian Army. The rifle's rugged simplicity was a blessing in the mud-choked trenches of the Eastern Front, where more complex mechanisms often failed. It was a weapon that could withstand immense abuse and keep functioning. But it was in the Second World War that the Mosin-Nagant cemented its place in history. The modernized M1891-30 was the most numerous small arm in the entire Red Army. It was the rifle of the desperate defense of Moscow, the brutal urban warfare of Stalingrad, and the triumphant final assault on Berlin. Its simplicity was its greatest virtue. In a total war that demanded the mobilization of millions of citizens, the Mosin-Nagant was a weapon that could be produced in vast quantities and, crucially, a weapon that a barely trained conscript could learn to use effectively in a matter of hours. There were no complex adjustments, no delicate parts. It was a brutally simple tool for a brutally simple job. While the Soviet Union would field millions of submachine guns like the PPSH-41, the Mosin-Nagant remained the primary weapon of the common rifleman, the backbone of the Red Army's infantry divisions. Recognizing the rifle's inherent accuracy, the Soviets had begun developing a specialized version for sharpshooters in the early 1930s. The result was the M1891-30 sniper rifle. These were not standard infantry rifles. They were selected from the production line for their superior accuracy. The bolt handles were bent downwards to clear a scope, and they were fitted with high-quality optics, most famously the compact and effective 3.5 by PU scope. In the hands of a trained sniper, the Mosin-Nagant was transformed from a simple soldier's rifle into a precision instrument of death. It was with this weapon that legendary Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaytsev, who famously hunted German officers in the ruins of Stalingrad, and Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the most successful female sniper in history with 309 confirmed kills, plied their deadly trade. The Mosin-Nagant sniper rifle became a symbol of silent,
patient and lethal resistance.
Part 4. The Global Soldier. After the end of the Second World War, the Mosin-Nagant story, far from being over, entered a new and truly global phase. As the Cold War descended, the Soviet Union standardized on semi-automatic and fully automatic weapons like the SKS and the AK-47, rendering the bolt-action Mosin obsolete for frontline Soviet use. But the USSR had millions of surplus three-line rifles in its arsenals. These weapons, along with the tooling and technical specifications to produce them, became a key instrument of Soviet foreign policy. They were supplied en masse to communist bloc nations and revolutionary movements around the world. The Mosin-Nagant became the rifle of the Warsaw Pact. Poland produced its own versions, including the M44 carbine, as did Hungary, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Communist China received massive shipments of Soviet Mosins and began producing its own copy of the M1944 carbine, designated the Type 53. Through this massive proliferation, the Mosin-Nagant became a ubiquitous presence in the proxy wars and hotspots of the Cold War. It was carried by Chinese and North Korean troops in the Korean War, where it faced off against the American M1 Garand. It was a primary weapon for the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army during the Vietnam War, valued for its powerful cartridge that could easily punch through the jungle foliage and light cover that often defeated the American 5.56mm round. The rifle's journey continued across the globe. It appeared in the hands of communist rebels and government soldiers alike in conflicts across Africa and Latin America. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the rifle refused to retire. During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s, the Mosin-Nagant was used by the Mujahideen, who either captured them or received them from Chinese sources. They valued its long-range and powerful cartridge for the kind of mountain warfare that defined the conflict. Well into the 21st century, the seemingly immortal rifle continues to appear. It has been seen in the hands of irregular fighters and insurgents in the conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and most recently, Ukraine, where it has been issued to militia and reservist units. For a mass-produced, standard-issue military rifle, this longevity is absolutely unprecedented. It has remained a viable, if dated, weapon of war in an era of drones, smart bombs, and advanced assault rifles.
Part 5. Verdict on the Eternal Soldier. So we are left with the ultimate question, why? In a century defined by the most rapid technological advancement in human history, why has this simple 19th century bolt-action rifle endured? The reasons for its immortality are as simple and rugged as the weapon itself. First is its simplicity and low cost. The Mosin-Nagant was designed from day one to be easy to manufacture by a nation with a developing industrial base, and easy for a peasant conscript to learn and use. This made it the perfect weapon for mass mobilization. Second is its phenomenal reliability. Its design is famously forgiving, with loose tolerances that allow it to function when clogged with mud, sand, or ice that would choke a more sophisticated firearm. It is a weapon built for the worst possible conditions. And third is its powerful cartridge. The 7.62x54R round is a full-power military cartridge, capable of delivering lethal energy at long ranges. It remains a potent and effective battlefield cartridge to this day. The Mosin-Nagant is more than just a rifle. It is a cultural and historical artifact. It rightly stands in the pantheon of the greatest military bolt-action rifles in history, alongside its legendary contemporaries like the German Mauser 98K, the British Lee Enfield, and the American Springfield 1903. Each of those rifles was a superb design, and each has a proud and storied history. But the Mosin-Nagant has outlasted them all. While its rivals were almost entirely retired from military service by the 1960s, the Mosin continued its journey, becoming a tool of revolution and resistance across half the globe for another 60 years. No other bolt-action rifle in history can claim such a long and geographically diverse service record.
In the final analysis, the three-line rifle, model 1891, is a true historical anomaly. Designed in Tsarist Russia to protect the interests of an empire, it went on to outlive that empire, outlive its creator, and outlive every single one of its original competitors. It became the rifle of the revolution that overthrew its first masters, the primary tool used to defeat fascism in the Great Patriotic War, and a symbol of insurgencies and uprisings for decades to come. It is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most enduring design is not the most advanced or the most elegant, but the one that is the most brutally simple and stubbornly reliable. This is not just the story of a rifle. It is the story of an eternal soldier that has marched through 3 centuries of human conflict.